just about everything we need, from condiments to cargo. Made of steel, aluminum, paper, and glass, they protect and preserve. They're underground and above ground, and they journey around the world. They've revolutionized civilization. Now, containers on Modern Marvels. In China, TVs, blue jeans, and light bulbs are being manufactured by the millions. But how do these goods get to stores in the United States? And the transport industry's ubiquitous standard shipping containers.
And to move that enormous bulk from the offshore locations to the mainland, they need many, many big boxes. And the big boxes we speak of are those 45-foot containers that are traveling down the road with the blue jeans or the televisions or the tires that you see stacked in the shelves in your retail outlets.
The container's journey from source to store is a long one.
Typically, the goods are stuffed and manufactured in a distribution center somewhere in China. In this case, we'll say the Guangdong province. Then from Guangdong to the port of Hong Kong, for example, that transport is done by one of three ways. One, over the road via truck. Two, via rail. Or three, via smaller vessels through a river. Then it arrives to the Hong Kong port, typically between 4,000 containers to about 9,000 for the bigger ships are loaded at the Hong Kong port. Then the vessel leaves Hong Kong to the port of LA, for example. When it's arriving at the port of LA, the container is unloaded. At that point, the container is loaded onto either a rail or another truck and then transported to its final destination.
The container will make about 120 trips from port to port in its approximate 10-year life.
On the journey from Far East to the mainland during typhoon season, there could potentially be 40 and 50-foot waves that rock the vessel itself to very severe pitched angles. And those containers need to withstand pounding of the open sea to protect the goods inside.
The containers are designed to hold up to 20 tons of goods, and they can be carried by 3 different modes of transportation. Without this intermodal system capability, international commerce as we know it would be almost impossible. The key to the system is the container itself. At the China International Marine Containers Factory in Shenzhen, China, new containers are turned out every 5 minutes. Huge sheets of steel are folded, bolted, and painted on an assembly line into one of 3 lengths as dictated by the International Standards Organization, or ISO. The uniform lengths are 20 feet, 40 feet, and 45 feet. Most containers today are of the 40-foot variety. Each container is also manufactured in such a way that they're easily interlocked.
When containers are loaded on vessels, they're connected to one another using a device called a twist lock. There's also rod lashing, which is essentially rods that are lashed to the sides of the container to make them more sturdy when they're stacked on top of one another.
Before containerization, cargo handling took much more time and muscle.
The maritime industry is one that's steeped in tradition, and for centuries, goods were loaded and unloaded much in the same way. Freight was moved using cargo nets and grappling hooks to be taken out of cargo holds, at which time a crew of stevedores would then take the freight and rearrange it onto a pallet, which would then be lifted again onto either a carriage or a buggy or even a truck.
Then in 1955, Malcolm McLean, a trucking entrepreneur from North Carolina, acquired a steamship company and changed the industry forever. He removed the wheels from his trucks, strengthened the sides of the trailers, and stacked them on his ship's deck. His prototype container ship, the Ideal X, with 58 trailers on deck, made its inaugural voyage from New Jersey to Texas in 1956. His enterprise became Sea-Land Services, an international shipping company, and McLean became known as the father of containerization. Around the same time, Oakland-based Matson Navigation Company conducted research on ways to control rising costs. It discovered that loading and unloading freight in the traditional manner was slow and expensive.
As a result of this research, Matson developed its own containerization program, which effectively revolutionized the movement of goods in the Pacific Rim. In 1958, Matson moved its first containers out of San Francisco Bay. There were 20 containers that moved on Matson's Hawaiian Merchant. It was an enormous change in the way the Hawaiian economy was serviced from the mainland.
Containerization sparked a waterfront metamorphosis. Crane operators eventually replaced the gangs of longshoremen who once defined the loading docks. In order to move the heavy steel containers, the gantry crane, or portainer, was developed. It required only one driver in a cab high above the pier to move cargo from ship to shore. As more shipping companies began using containers, their standardization and interchangeability became crucial to the success of the intermodal system. All the transport industries had to adapt.
For example, for trucks, we had to make the chassis and the beds of the truck to be able to fit 20 and 40 footers. Rail, we had to do the same thing. We had to make sure that the bridges or any overpasses, at least in the United States, could fit too high. And for vessels, we had to make sure that the vessel slots that the containers go into are 8 foot wide, 8.5 foot tall, and obviously 20 or 40 foot.
By 2005, approximately 90% of all cargo moved by standardized containers. But as freight containers came to facilitate global trade, the world became a more dangerous place.
After 9/11, obviously, security has gone up exponentially. There have been many noted examples where unauthorized terrorists have been in a container using that to smuggle a terrorist into the United States. Another example could be inserting a weapon of mass destruction into the container itself.
So companies like GE Security have developed a smart device to secure the container during its vulnerable voyage.
The manner in which we install the container security device on the already existing 13 million containers is much like a Lego piece is installed. The CSD simply snaps on to the door frame of the ISO container.
The device has a magnetic sensor that monitors container door openings and a central processing unit that records the time of those events. The antenna is the only piece that is outside the container. After loading, the shipper accesses the system, logs in an access code, registers the container number, and authorizes sealing the container. In response, the device will transmit a data log each time the door has been opened and resealed, or whenever it's electronically queried. Before the container arrives at port, the United States Customs and Border Protection has analyzed it from a security perspective.
Based upon their risk rules, they will choose to inspect anywhere from as low as, say, 1% to upwards around 8 to 10% of those containers, depending on what they feel is the risk profile of that container. One way is via technology to do an X-ray of the box, for example, to see if there are any weapons of mass destruction in it. Another way is to physically open the box and actually check the contents.
In the near future, containers with this device may clear customs in far less time, ultimately getting products to our stores safer and faster. After the shipping container has been opened at distribution warehouses, there are usually more containers inside, like nesting dolls.